Hello, my name is Emma Sams and you're listening to Healing Out Loud, the podcast where we talk about all types of mental health, how this affects different people, and talk with new people each week to share their stories and advice. On today's episode, we'll be joined by support worker John Coates to hear about his advice to young people struggling with their mental health and talk about who he works for. If you struggle with any of today's topics or feel like you need support, please reach out. Please don't suffer alone. You're not alone, and at the end of the show, we will talk about where you can go for support.
I'm John Coates, and I'm Senior Early Help Consultant with North Yorkshire County Council Children and Family Service and the early help part of that. I've worked with children and young people and families for just over 40 years now. The early help part of Children and Family Service, that the role of that element of the service is to support children, young people and families to stop problems escalating into needing higher level services, and that could be social care or it could be health services and so on. The service overall, there's different parts to it. We have a team of children and family workers, and they work directly with families to do an assessment and to work alongside parents and children to identify what the concerns are, what their worries are, and then try to put a plan in place to address them to get the best possible outcomes. It's a consent-based service, so we only work with families and children if they want to work with us. And anybody can refer into the service, though obviously there are thresholds, which mean that there are certain levels of cases that we would take. My role is sort of sits in between things, in that if somebody makes a referral into early help, but it doesn't look like it would meet the threshold for a children and family worker to be involved, then it comes to me and I have conversations with parents, with schools, with other agencies to try and work out what the best source of support for them would be, because a children and families worker isn't necessarily always the best option, because they're not known to the family sometimes as somebody else who can fulfil that role. Yeah, I mean, early help is a concept as well. A lot of government documents like Working Together to Safeguard Children talk about early help, but when they're talking about early help, they're talking about it as a concept, and that concept being that services get involved as early as possible to stop problems escalating. But it's all about the same principle, that actually it's about the right support from the right people at the right time.
And what kind of made you want to work for early help? Like, how did you get there? What was your thought process and steps towards that?
So I started off actually being involved in youth work with young people, and then decided to move into teaching. But even when I was teaching, I was still doing youth work alongside it, and gradually over time the youth work side, the work with young people, grew, and the teaching got less and less until it disappeared completely. And then in the time that I've been with North Yorkshire County Council, because I've been with North Yorkshire County Council now for nearly 30 years, there have been a number of different reorganisations, and the sort of service has changed slightly each time as we've gone on. So I've sort of transformed from a teaching with youth work post into a much more family-focused sort of role.
So before, you were saying that early help's all about kind of stopping young people from getting to crisis point. What would you have to do as part of your role if a child did get to crisis point and they came to you for support?
It's unlikely a young person would come to me directly, because my contact now with direct contact with young people is almost non-existent, because I tend to be dealing with the referrals that have come in where somebody else has identified a problem and they put a referral, then I look at what can happen with that. But if that were to happen, if a young person had come to us in crisis, it would be a question of, well, at the starting point will be reassuring that young person, not making any promises, but actually ensuring that we would try to help them in the best way possible. And there's a number of avenues for that, because that would depend on actually what the issue was. You know, whether it was a mental health crisis or whether it was a family relationship problem or a school issue. You would try and direct them to the appropriate service and support them in into that service or work with that other service for that to happen. Obviously, there are procedures and processes that we must follow, that if we deem that a child is at serious risk of harm, then we need to be talking to social care and considering a referral into them.
Young people sometimes struggle to reach out for help from like a professional level, and a lot of people go to kind of their friends or family. What sort of advice would you give to those friends and family to help support the person in need?
That's a good question, and I think you're right that actually young people will often do that, which is a good thing in a way, because it means that they are actually talking to somebody, but it's also potentially risky, because sometimes the people they're talking to don't know the right sort of support or the advice to give. So what I would say to the people who had been approached was, make sure that you've got the other person's interests at heart, but also don't be afraid as well to take it to somebody else. Now, it may be that the young person's come with a friend and said, I'm telling you this in confidence, which does make it a little bit difficult, but at the end of the day, they need to be doing what is best for their friend in the longer term. Having said that, there is a lot of information out there. There's lots of information on the internet. There are services such as Buzzers, which is run by Compass, which is a texting service where you can actually talk to somebody and you don't have to necessarily reveal your personal details to them. So there is a lot of support out there, but the message really would be, actually, if you don't think you're in a position to give the help that is needed, then go and talk to somebody else on that young person's behalf.
And what age group is it that you work with as
Early
part
help
of your role?
0 to 18. So it's right across the sort of the definition of children and young people, really. So that there is a cut-off point at 18. But then if we were still working with somebody at that age, we would try and pass across to adult services when they got to that point.
Yeah. And what are the adult services like that you would transfer them to at that point?
Normally, we'll be looking at adult mental health services, which is the Health and Adult Services team, which we have sort of good working relationships within the county. If I'm honest, the majority of children and young people that we tend to work with, there's very few who are actually of the age of 17 or 18. The main focus is actually within our own services, but if that was the case, then we would be looking at passing across into other services. And there's a lot of voluntary organisations out there who work with adults as well, so we often will transfer into voluntary services.
Yeah. And when they get to that point, do they have to start paying for their services, or is it still free?
No, it would still be free, because we're talking national health services or charities. There are services out there that people can pay for, particularly around mental health. Some people will pay for private therapy or counselling and so on.
Personally, what do you think the support is like for young people, and is there any way that it could be improved?
I think the support that is there is actually very good. There's a lot of service, particularly when we're talking about mental health. I think the past few years have seen a massive increase in actually what is out there for young people, whether it's actually a service or whether it's things that are online, or whether it's an increased awareness in schools about mental health. I think that's been a really positive change. Limited number of space. I'm aware that some services have waiting lists simply because the demand is so high. So in terms of how could it be improved, I think more of the same would be what we'll be talking about, because at the moment the services are good but struggle to meet demand. They would probably acknowledge that themselves as well.
So if there is one piece of advice that you'd give for a young person that's struggling, what would it be?
It would be, don't struggle alone. And that would apply not just to young people but to parents as well. That if you are struggling with your mental health issues or any issue, is to talk to somebody, to find somebody, whether it's a friend, whether it's a teacher, whether it's an agency, whether it's a service online, it doesn't matter. It's whoever you feel comfortable talking to, but do share it. The chances are there's other people going through the same things as you. It's unlikely that what you're experiencing, although it might feel like it, might feel like you're the only person feels like that, you probably are. There's probably lots of people out there in a similar situation, and there will be support out there. So it would be, reach out, talk to somebody, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's a service. If people are listening to this, then do talk to people, do talk to schools. I know that sometimes you may not think you've got a good relationship with your teachers, but you will find most of them do want to listen and do want to support, and that's a good starting point. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking part.
That's okay.
I feel like it's definitely all about, there's help out there for everybody. It's just finding the right support for you. Thank you so much again to John for taking part in today's show and giving us some amazing information and advice. Now, if you or somebody you know is going through anything that we have been through today, or feel like you want or need support, please don't be alone, as there are people out there that can help you and talk to you and give you advice. All you have to do is ask for help. There are many places that you can reach out to, online or in person. Links and information can be found below in our podcast description or at healingoutloudpodcast.com.